Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Philanthropy. On today's episode, we have a powerhouse of a woman. I'm very excited to have my wonderful, amazing friend on here. Her name is Bev Carter-Buffalo, and she was a guidance counselor when I was a principal. We worked together in Onion Lake, and now she is a guidance counselor, supervisor slash coordinator for all of the counseling programs in Onion Lake. And we're going to talk about what it's like as females working within a lot of patriarchal systems and what the struggles are there. And, this was a topic that was very common among the both of us in our experience. So I think she's the perfect person to come on and talk about that. And she's also been working towards a doctorate in social work. And so she can maybe speak to some of that. But she is an amazing, extraordinary, and very intelligent woman. So welcome, Bev. I'm so excited to see you.
Well, it's a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me to this podcast. I was thinking, oh my gosh, what are we going to talk about? I had so many things I wanted to talk about. Mind you, it was because I miss you so much,
Aw, I miss
and
you
we've
too.
had when you were working at the high school there, we had so many um, in-depth, soul-searching, awakening conversations prior to school starting and after when, school was done for the day. We had some really, really great conversations about, the system, our lives, and it was really great. And I always tell people that she got me in regards to the things that were going on in Onion Lake. And it's not just in Onion Lake, it's all over Indian country in regards to intergenerational trauma and the ramifications of that, right? So you understood me at that level, what my passion was, and we were able to see and make some things happen in regards to having more trauma informed awareness within the system. And it really does help in regards to engaging with a lot of the students that we converse with on a daily basis.
Absolutely. No, I definitely felt so supported, when I was working with you, and I think, our lives were so parallel in many respects, working within the system as Indigenous women and at higher levels where you're supervising staff and you're really trying to change a lot of those system dynamics, but also because we were both working on doctorates and what it was like as single women doing that, and with your family obligations and everything. And so I think it was very easy and natural for us to be connecting on so many levels. But I know I really appreciated the insight that you brought, because I remember at one point we were having a conversation, and I was about to say to, I think, some higher ups that the biggest struggle we were having with students, because that was my experience, was that the students were so explosive and there was a lot of crisis and trauma and chaos, and I saw that firsthand in my office all the time. So I was working towards how to mention this, and you said, oh, but wait, I mean, we noticed something different on our side, on the counseling end. And I said, what do you mean? And you said, well, we're seeing different behaviors in the offices. A lot of it was imploding kind of behaviors, and the self-harm, suicide ideation, and that sort of thing. And so it was really good for me to have you there, because it always helped me to balance the perspective that, what I saw was true, but it wasn't always the complete vision of everything and everything that was going on. So I know we did a lot of work there, but I do know that probably one of the biggest struggles that we faced was trying to move ahead with being women in leadership positions. How do we work with people that come from colonial systems? And I really think that that was the case. I don't necessarily think that it was just like pig-headed men. I don't want to say it that way, but at the same time, I do think when we go back and we look at colonization and the impacts on our Indigenous communities, these were systems that were forced upon us. And I think that unfortunately, the reality in a lot of our, and it's not just, Onion Lake, for instance, it's a lot of the Indigenous communities, it's, different levels of government, like we're talking FSIN and whatnot, that people have really embraced colonial systems, whether they were aware of it or not. And unfortunately, having that really colonial perspective has done a lot of damage, I think, in our Indigenous communities.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I totally agree with you in everything that you have said. And just to add on that, in my journey, being a single mom, I'm also a grandmother too. I have two beautiful granddaughters who I really, just on a side note, I really have to refrain myself sometimes because I, um, I can be really real and sometimes I might drop some F-bombs, but I'm trying not to do that today.
That's okay. You know what? If you let an F bomb out, no judgment.
Well, I'll really try to refrain myself because I'm trying to, look and act professional here today.
F bombs can be
You know
professional.
me, right? You know me.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was saying that I am a single mother. I have been for, oh my gosh, quite a few years. I was actually divorced back in 2010, and I do have four amazing adult children. My two oldest are two-spirit, and I was like, I'm so blessed. I am so blessed,
Uh-huh.
having my daughter and my son that are two-spirit. They bring so much knowledge and wisdom from the feminine and the masculine side. So I have a wealth of knowledge just right here in my home. Plus, I have my two other daughters and my two granddaughters who basically are the world to me. They're in my life. I just immerse myself with them whenever I possibly can because I don't live in Onion Lake. I do commute back and forth. So it's about a 4 hour drive commute, and I stay with my sister in Onion Lake. So I, come home on weekends. So
Mhm.
that's been an ongoing thing for 3 years now. Needless to say, I've put a lot of miles on my truck. And, but that's okay. It really keeps me busy. It keeps me grounded. It keeps me motivated because as I had spoke to you, you know, over the years that we were working together, it is a struggle working in an Indigenous community, right? And it's not only Indigenous communities. I think the majority of women face this where they are subjected to being and feeling like they are less than their male associate or even their partner at times
Mhm.
because the patriarchy was brought in from the Europeans. And this is how they were able to silence the indigenous women here in North America. Because I always make reference to prior before contact, where males and females had very respectful roles. They were on an even level with each other. So females were very respected and revered for their spiritual strength as well as their mental strength.
Mhm.
And males were very respected for their spiritual strengths as well as their physical strengths. So they complemented each other, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then, so they were always placed on an equal plane in regards to respect and acknowledgement. And then when the Europeans came, they had noticed that women were really placed at a higher level of respect than what would say uh, at that time European women,
Mhm.
because European women were treated as property
Yep.
and often considered less than in the patriarchal society. And over the years, that really filtered down into our Indigenous communities. So taking on these beliefs because of the reserve system and the residential school system, and it was so prevalent in the in the residential schools. So these belief systems, these thought patterns, basically just mesh themselves into our traditional beliefs. And basically, it was fear based as well, too. So in today's society, you can see it. It's so prevalent in our communities where the males are placed at a higher standard than women.
Hmm.
So you and I know countless of other women always feel this presence in a daily basis, and it's a continuous battle all the time because it just makes you feel like you are unimportant. Your knowledge, your experience is not considered as valid
Hmm.
as would a man's experience. So to me, it's a constant battle that I deal with on a daily basis, not just where I work, but everywhere in
Yep.
society in general, right? So
Hmm.
that's something that I feel a lot of women, can feel that. I think with more education, more people talking about male privilege, the patriarchy, I think I don't know, slowly there will be a change. There'll be a shift. I'm hoping in the future. I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime, but there's always hope, right?
Here's hoping.
Yeah.
100%. I really think that it's one of those things where you can't, we definitely need to educate and bring awareness, especially to the men who struggle with this the most and for their own, it's probably insecurity that keeps them really conscious of their power or lack thereof, which is why they have to enforce it on other people. But I really think it's important, especially for women, that you don't wait for permission. We don't ask for permission to take back our power and to sit in our power and to own that power. We don't need that from men. And when we submit and we ask for that power from a man, we're already acknowledging that they have the power and we don't. And I think that's where the danger is. And I know for myself as a woman, when I stood in my power or sat in my power and acknowledged it as a woman, then I found often I would have more respect, I think, from a lot of these men. But that being said, that doesn't mean it was easy. I remember specifically, even in Onion Lake, that there were times when I really pushed for something and I met a lot of resistance. There was a lot of times where there was a lot of pushback. No, 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 why? And I had to just be consistent and continue pushing for something. And then eventually, maybe if they took the idea on as their own, then we saw some steps towards progress. But it could never be attributed to me. It was never Jessica's idea, and I didn't need that. Ultimately, I didn't need for somebody to say, oh, acknowledge me and acknowledge this was my idea or anything like that. I didn't need it. I needed to see the change. And so for me, it was real important that I was like, well, I don't really care if they want to own that idea and make it their own, as long as we see that change, as long as they're on the same team and they're working towards that goal, but I think that that's part of the problem with colonialism and the patriarchy, that until somebody thinks it's their idea, then you might not see any kind of change. And so in this instance, perhaps that's probably the answer, that until they see that, they're the ones who want to change and bring in women and see their power rise, we might still meet that resistance. We might still see that struggle. And I remember particularly this one time, there had been somebody who didn't work at the school, but they had been commenting on my leadership. And they had said, well, she doesn't have a very commanding presence. That's the term that they use. She doesn't have a commanding presence. And I said to this person who was relaying this to me, and I was like, but is that me? Is that an accurate reflection of me as a human? It's Jessica who does not have a commanding presence. Or is this a societal problem in all of Onion Lake that, there's a struggle to notice and recognize females in power? Because I said that to me is the real issue. And I said, when I look around, I see counselors, like chief and council counselors who struggle because people have a hard time accepting women in power. I look over at you and, the power that you hold, and you have the same struggle. And, and I just across the board, I would look around and I would recognize that it was a lot of women. So I'm like, you can't pin that on me and say that I don't have a commanding presence when in fact all women in this community and like I said, that was my experience for sure in Onion Lake, and that's a microcosm of the larger Indigenous communities that I'm sure it's the exact same everywhere. In fact, right at this moment, I have seen two of my friends who are counselors in two other bands and the struggles that they're having internally with their own chief and council, because these are women in power and they got in for a reason. They saw corrupt systems, they saw the changes that needed to be made, and they stepped in and said, okay, I'm ready to do this work. And of course, there are people who are unwilling to embrace these new change ideas because it disrupts the power system. It disrupts the people who are benefiting from sitting on their thrones and practicing these corrupt practices when you have somebody who is, forcing that accountability, wants to make sure that people are heard, and, and so I've seen this all across the board. And so, even though I was a little bit annoyed, and actually the person who said I didn't have a commanding presence was a woman. And I was like, what the hell? Okay. So many levels of BS right here. But you know what? She was just a jealous woman, and I knew that.
Yeah, it's, oh my gosh, we could actually have this conversation that could extend for hours and hours and hours from and talk about so many different aspects in regards to what women are facing today. And I do see that even at the chief and council level too, because um, I sense, like, I see the division.
Mm-hmm.
From my reserve, there were I believe there was four female counselors, and there was such a division between the male and the female. And the women were are very, very respectable, very, very intelligent women. And they had a mission, and they had a purpose, and they had a cause, right? To try and change the system in Onion Lake. But when they reached that level, the chief and council level, they were met with a lot of conflict. So basically, there was a divide between several male counselors and the several female counselors. So there was always this clash, and the women were trying to bring about change by educating the community as well too. And I guess they really learned a lesson that was very harsh and was very fast and was very realistic about how women are perceived in Indigenous communities.
Mm-hmm.
And they met up with a lot of conflict. They met up with a lot of argumentative um, reactions, and they just were not being heard.
Mm-hmm.
So this has gone on. I have another friend who is in council at another reserve west of Onion Lake, and she's going through the same thing. She's very vocal. She wanted transparency. She wanted to, do what was best for her people. That was her mission, her cause for running for council. And she succeeded because the people believed in her,
Mm-hmm.
and now she's just running into walls. It could, possibly legal. I guess the leadership there doesn't want her to be transparent in what is going on. So she's really, facing a lot of challenges there as well too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it is everywhere. Do you ever get so exhausted
Yep.
from just maybe just dealing with the day-to-day, everyday roles and responsibilities that you have. But on top of that, dealing with, I guess, the male privilege aspect of it, where
Yep.
you're not being heard. So
Mhm.
we had that conversation that one time, I think it was last year, in regards to the rationale as to why I wanted to pursue my doctorate, right?
Mhm.
So I was pursuing a doctorate in counseling and psychotherapy. I have since put that aside for now because of the high demand of this position I currently am sitting in now, and I just couldn't juggle the two.
Mhm.
Being a single woman, yes, I have grandchildren, I have responsibilities, I'm commuting back and forth from my home to Onion Lake to work and putting a lot of time and effort into trying to, I guess, make it a better place for our students. And
Mhm.
that was that is my still my focus there, and my goal is to have these students that we're working with heard and recognized and acknowledged, right? So with all those responsibilities, I just, I'm going to have to put my education aside for now
Mhm.
and work on this, and then go back in possibly a year, and
Mhm.
then start my journey again, with my doctorate. It's always going to be there, so I'm not worried about that.
Yep.
Okay. But it's just that constant struggle, and you don't see it on a regular basis. You don't see that. You have to read between the lines. You have to
Yep.
just look at the subtleties of it, where male privilege is so rampant, in any community, where they don't listen to what you have to say. Even if you're proposing things, they'll just kind of disregard you. However, if a male suggests the same thing, oh my God, they're just on it. That's the best thing ever. I mean, that's the best thing I've ever heard. That will work for the community. But of course, if a male is pitching those things, of course they're going to be heard. Of course they're going to be acknowledged. And then, and I guess on a positive note, things are getting done, right? But at the expense of us not having our voices heard and acknowledged and recognized.
That's right.
So I guess it's a tricky situation. It's you choose your battles, right? Pick your battles. What do
That's
you
right.
want done? What do you want to accomplish? What do you want to achieve? Choose your battles.
Yeah, I think that's sage advice, considering, when you're working within these systems, ultimately you're going to have to make that decision. Like, how badly do I want to see this change versus how badly does it have to be me who gets acknowledged and gets the credit, and that sort of thing. And that's a real frustrating part, operating within those systems. But something that's really interesting that happened for me in my life, and this is why I think what we see right now in our Indigenous communities is it's a lot of lateral violence because entire peoples have been disempowered, right? It's not just the women, the men have also been disempowered. If you go back and you look at, all of these, colonial policies that we've had to endure with the residential school, with the pass system and reserves, and the 50s and 60s scoops, and all of the bullshit that First Nations people have endured, it was constant control via the Indian Act, right? Like, we are the supreme and reigning power, the government, and we now control these people. And of course, control was necessary in order to, push their agenda, which is, of course, resource extraction. Like, let's get real. It was about, settling these lands and profiting from these lands. And you can't do that when you have, millions of Indians running around and getting in the way. So you have to control these people. And now we have, assumed this control for, hundreds of years. And it's to the point where people don't know how to express their power. And so you have chief and council systems, these, Indian Act chiefs is what people call them. And so now suddenly people who have never had power suddenly have power, and they have access to millions of dollars. They've never had access to this amount of money. And then this is where we see, I always say it's like Lord of the Rings, where my precious, and everybody goes a little bit crazy over this ring, right? And it's the same thing, this chief and council craziness for this pot of money, and they have access to it. And this is where we see all these corrupt practices. And then, of course, people wanting to come in and say, hey, you're being greedy, you're being selfish, you're thinking of yourself, and you're not thinking about the people. And we often see that coming from women because, of course, we're the mothers, we're the grandmothers, we're the ones who are watching the kids and having to make sure there's enough money to feed everybody and clothe everybody and keep people safe. And so I do see that there's often women who are pushing for that because they're looking out for the kids. That's not to say men don't do it. I know there's going to be men who listen to this and get pissed off with me for, saying this, but I do think it's a systemic issue that everybody has been disempowered. And now we have the lateral violence, and we have everybody fighting everybody for power. And it's really frustrating. So something that happened for me that was really kind of interesting was in my journey into leadership and my journey into my doctorate, none of it was ever encouraged by Indigenous people, like by Indigenous women, by Indigenous men. None of it. Every step along that way was a white man pushing me, which I thought was really interesting. So when I think of me being a VP, like I had never entertained the idea of being a vice principal, being a principal. And here was, this white man, a VP, and he said, if I get in as a principal, I want you to be my VP. And I said, well, I'm not really sure. It's not really something I'm interested in, but I'm the kind of person who has no problem negotiating a fair salary for myself. And he really liked and respected me for that because, I was complaining to him about my salary and I don't agree with it. I'm going to move. I'm going to go somewhere else. And he said, no, we're going to change that. When I get in, we're going to change things. And, I want you there with me. And I said, all right, so I'll give it a shot. And then when he moved, he's like, you know what? It's time for me to leave. I want you to take over as the principal. And I said, no. Again, I don't want this job. It's not for me. And he said, no, you're going to do a great job. So he pushed for me and I got in. And then, of course, while I was doing my principalship, my first principalship, I thought, well, maybe I should have the credentials because at that point I just had an education degree, a BA or B.Ed. I had a BA and a B.Ed, but I didn't have a master's. And I said, okay, you know what? Maybe let me get some training. Maybe this will help me in my role. And along that journey, 3 of my professors, they were all white men, old white men with a lot of power and a lot of education. And they said, Jess, we really want you to do this doctorate program. You would do really excellent in it. I think you should look at it. And at that time, again, I was like, well, what the hell am I going to do with a doctorate? It's not my plan. And, none of this was my plan, leadership and my doctorate. And they said, no, you will do amazing. You need to be in this. We're going to write you reference letters. You just need to apply. And I said, all right, and so then I went in and so that's how I'm in my doctorate right now. And even this podcast wouldn't have happened if not for my white male friend. And again, a man who's very educated, who has a lot of privilege, and, open arms was like, Jess, you would do an amazing job on this podcast. Let me show you how to do this. And I said, okay, so none of these big steps that I took, it was Indigenous women saying, you should do this, you'd be great. And that's not to say that they didn't encourage me when I got in. There was always a lot of praise and people saying, good for you, this is awesome. But there was never anybody on, my Indigenous side who was pushing for these things. It was always white men. And I thought, that's a really interesting dynamic. But to me, here is the epitome of an allyship of men who say, you know what, we have power, we recognize that, and we're comfortable in our power, but we also recognize and understand that the world is changing and we need to change along with it. And we need to make space at the table for women, for people of color, for people who are 2S plus, and and like just diversity. And so acknowledging that these are people who are saying, okay, we need to see change and we're going to make change and we're going to bring in these people, that made it so much easier for someone like myself. And I like I said, I wasn't pushing in any of those steps along the way for myself to advance to that position. But there are people who want those positions. There are
Oh,
people who
absolutely.
want to do those things. And we don't have, the people who are able to empower others because we're so busy fighting for our own power. And I think that's where we're doing it wrong as Indigenous people, that you can't fight for power. You just have to step into your own power. You have to own your own power. And and then hopefully, we can do a better job of building each other up, because I think that's where we really fail sometimes. That's part of where we have inherited that toxicity of lateral violence, and where we're doing that to each other. And I think that's the real sad part.
Well, absolutely. I agree with you in all those aspects. There is so much lateral violence in, I guess, any community. And there's even so much, in regards to the lateral violence between women,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I don't know if it's because of the insecurities or it could be a number of other things,
See?
but
Mm-hmm.
we just, I don't understand why women should be hating each other or feeling jealous
Mm-hmm.
of each other when we're all trying to lift each other up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I see that quite often, and even in the in the school system, these young girls very, very jealous, very
Mm-hmm.
insecure.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them. Some of them are very, very vocal and very expressive of what they want, who they are, they know who they are. But then we have these young girls who um, can be very insecure, and often when you go back, it it does stem from the relationships they have at home, and even
Mm-hmm.
with their, I guess, significant other.
Mm-hmm.
That has a lot to do with how they personally feel about themselves.
Mm.
So I don't want to you know make it look like that I've done this all by myself,
Yeah.
and I never had any male support on my journey. I've had tons of support from a lot of males as
Mm.
well, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, about my path and where I wanted to go,
Mm-hmm.
and incredibly supportive, loving men.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see that they were open. They were open to be vulnerable, which
Mm.
is an incredible strength, I
Yep.
feel, in any person, both male or female or two spirit. So when they're open to being vulnerable and you see that and you acknowledge it, I mean, it just builds on that relationship that you have with that person. And I've had many men in my life who have showed their vulnerable side and supported me as well too on my journey. And it just makes it just I'm really grateful for them
Mm.
in regards to the advice, the knowledge, the patience that they had in me, telling it to me in sometimes harsh terms.
Yeah.
They say it's constructive criticism, but you know, whatever advice or whatever observation they've made about me, be it me thinking it negative or positive, it's always a strength at the end of the day, right? Because
Mm.
you're taking that knowledge that they have given you and then using it to move forward in your life, which is so great because we're not perfect. We're not always going to make the right choices or,
Yeah.
follow that path, we're definitely going to go off left or off right sometimes, and I do that occasionally. um but it's always a learning, right? It's always a learning experience. All of your positive experiences and your negative
Yeah.
experiences, I pull them together as amazing learning experiences, because what you learn from the negative, the hurtful ones, man, it just builds you up. It just strengthens you
Hmm.
to it strengthens your spirit, it strengthens your core, and you just become stronger from that. You could become more resilient. And the men I've had in my life who have been supporters, colleagues that I've worked with, and even my brothers. I just love my brothers. They're just
Yeah.
amazing. A lot of people think they're chauvinistic pigs, because they're powerful men and stuff,
Yeah.
but they're amazing. I just love my brothers.
Mm.
And they've given me a lot of advice over the years as well, too, being, the supportive older brother. And then I have two younger brothers, all wise in very, different aspects. And I really take their knowledge, their suggestions, their recommendations to heart,
Hmm.
because I think they do see that disparity as well too, of how women can be portrayed at at a lesser value than men. So I really honor my brothers in regards to that, that
Mm.
they're very open to, sometimes often difficult conversations,
Mm.
which a lot of men don't. They're I guess not ready, or feel insecure about going deeper, delving deeper.
Yeah.
So I love that. And I'm not saying there's a few men. There actually are a lot of men that, can do that. And I'm grateful that I know a lot of them that have been able to do that for me. Going back to how, I guess, the example I can, in regards to, I guess, young girls, how they feel about themselves. Um, I did some research, and it's pretty much, general public knowledge, how it seems like a young girl or a woman almost has to take the responsibility of, I guess, taking control of their body, their situation in regards to birth control, conception, right? It
Mm.
always seems to fall on the women
Yep.
to do that,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
But then when you look at it the other way around, a woman can only get pregnant once, and they're pregnant for 9 months, okay? So in reality, they could have a child every year. However, a male can impregnate so many women within a year. So this male could possibly have, 365 offsprings in 1 year if they had sex every day, right? And that
Yep.
they were able
Yep.
to conceive.
That's right.
So, in reality, who is the one that should be more responsible in regards to, um, you know, birth control?
Yep. Very good point, my friend. Look at Cardi B and her boyfriend, and he recently came out that he fathered another child while this one's pregnant. And we see this all the time, right? We
Oh,
hear it all the time, even in our communities where there's a couple expecting, and suddenly, oh, he has a kid somewhere else, and another one pregnant somewhere. So I think that's a very valid point. But I love what
mhm.
you said about your, brothers and your family, and the support network that you had, and how that played just such a, important role in your own power, your own strength as a woman. Let's say there's somebody listening right now, and, a female, and she doesn't have a support network like that. And maybe she's experiencing a lot of, women, even in her own family, women who are insecure, women who are jealous. What's something she could do to maybe, step into her power, feel better about herself when the people around her are just kind of shitty? What could we say for her?
Oh, there's so much that we could suggest or recommend. But one of the things that I've learned firsthand is that a lot of people become very comfortable being uncomfortable, right? They're
Mm,
in this little circle or little box and they've, built walls around themselves. So they're desperately wanting change to better their lives, but they're just so, secure in this little box, no matter how uncomfortable it is. It could be, a abusive relationship. They
mhm,
don't want to step out. And I've been there. Honestly, I've been there.
mm,
And so it's one of the scariest things that a woman has to do when they decide, I need to honor myself. And that's the
mm,
biggest thing. Okay. So once you step out of that box, everything is different. So sometimes you could feel like you're isolated, alone, and nobody's there to support you. But all you have to do is reach out. That's all you have to do.
mm,
Find some support groups. You can go online and research them. There are a lot of, resources within your community that you could access, even talking to elders as well, too, and just keep moving forward with that.
mhm,
So, that's basically what did for my personal life. I was
mhm,
in with my marriage there. It was abusive, but I was able to finally walk away from that.
mhm,
And the flip side about this is that, you know, there's so much healing when it comes to forgiving.
mm,
And I've done a lot of forgiving in through my life. And my ex-husband and I are very, very good friends. I see him as the father of my children, and we do a lot of things together. We share birthday parties, we sometimes do outings, and it gives the kids an opportunity to see that, hey, even though it was a very toxic relationship that they were brought into without choice,
yeah,
um, they're able to see that, as adults, we're mature enough to put all those issues aside and then focus on the healthy aspects of this relationship, that we can actually
mm,
talk, we can actually laugh, do things together as a family, but not as a family
yeah,
type thing. And it brings a sense of security for the kids as well too, as well as the grandchildren. So that in itself is an amazing strength and something that I had to work on for so many years, right?
mm,
Forgiving and then moving on, and then you know letting showing my kids that, hey, we can do this,
yeah,
right? And just moving on from there. So if you're in that situation where you're feeling alone and you want change, you just need to reach out, have a little faith in yourself, have some faith in yourself. We all have that. We all have that strength deep inside of us. We just have to
mm,
find it. It's in there.
yep,
And we just have to hold on to that and reach out and move forward. That's basically I guess my suggestion, my advice, because I've been there and I've
yeah.
had to do that. So,
Mm.
and look where I am today.
That's right. Absolutely. You're definitely a great example of rebuilding your life and building it into something really amazing and powerful. I also too am, I love the idea of, healing and forgiveness and still being able to create a community, to be able to create a family, even if, like you said, it's going to look different than how you
Mhm.
intended through a marriage, right? But it still worked. I see another example too around me. There's another couple where they divorced and they later worked on their relationship, and now they get together for family gatherings and they have the grandkids, and they swap the grandkids back and forth between them. And I just think that's really beautiful and really amazing that people can still rebuild after. And so there's hope, right? But I know for
Yeah.
myself, something that I think is really key too is to be, like let's look at the girl who doesn't have a very supportive surrounding, maybe she doesn't have a good support network. Something that I always say too is to work on that relationship with creator, that you're constantly, navigating that relationship, building it, getting it stronger. Because for myself, that's where a lot of my strength comes from. It's from, having that relationship through meditation, prayer, ceremony. But also, on a more practical side too, to say, okay, you know what, maybe I need to be building some skills, right? So I do think that it's really important to reach out for support with therapy and in resources like that. But I think for myself, when I am developing a skill, there comes a natural power that comes from that knowledge that you're capable, you're able to do something, and that you can rely on yourself because you've developed the skill. So I think if you're taking stock and you're feeling like, you know what, I don't have skills, then you'd have to sit and go, hey, what are the things that I think would be amazing? What are skills that I'm looking at that I would love to have? And then go pursue them and say, okay, this is how I'm going to put my mind to this. I'm going to commit to this and learn this. And then as you develop that skill set, then I think that really helps with your self-confidence, right? And when you're feeling confident, then it's a lot easier to sit in your power because you know what you bring to the world, you know what you offer. Some people have natural strengths, and that sort of thing. But I definitely think as humans, we have this beautiful ability that we can learn something, even if we're starting at, ground zero, we don't know anything. We can really turn our lives around into something amazing that maybe we couldn't even envision at one point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost like taking us full circle in regards to the topic we had, talked about in regards to the, development of women
Right.
and basically what can we do to elevate ourselves? We don't need the approval of men, right?
Mm-hmm.
In
Mm-hmm.
order to elevate ourselves to a higher standard that we feel we should be at, and we should be at a higher standard. But we have to do that. A man cannot put us there, elevate ourselves, because it's all individual work that we have to do, regardless of, the struggles we have on a daily basis, either at work or at home. It all comes from us. And you hit the nail on the head in regards to healing, that, utilizing our culture, utilizing our ceremonies and everything included in that, that's really, really powerful. That's
Mm.
really, really powerful. And over the years, for my personal healing journey, I've I don't remember, I lost count on how many sun dances I've attended and
Mm.
participated in, sweat lodges, just going out on the land, picking sweetgrass or sage, doing land-based activities, berry picking, or even just going out into the wilderness and just being one with that, because everything
Mm.
is relational. And Mother Earth feels you when you're grounded, when you step, when you put your feet on the ground barefoot. She feels you, and she's giving you something back as well too. And all the rocks, the trees, the birds, everything um has spirit, and they have strength as well too. So utilizing all those and incorporating those into your daily life as well, it's amazing what we can do as women if we put
Mm.
our minds to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with all of the things that have happened to women over these years, being devalued and not listened to, not respected, being treated as property, um, we can change that within ourselves. We might not be able to
Yep.
change all of society, but we can definitely do something to change how we see things today and how we feel about ourselves.
Yep.
And I guess that would be the key, is to look inside ourselves, because we have to do the work. It cannot be handed to us, right? We have to do the work. And, having discussions like this, it's just empowering as well, too, to
Right.
have points of views from other women as well, too. And not only the women, but from men, too,
Yep.
having their ideas, their thoughts as well. They do, give us a lot of support.
Mm.
And it's not saying that all men are bad, all men are just like, not all men, there are some jerks, really, rightfully so. I mean, life would be so boring if we didn't have those types of people in our lives, right? So, yes. So we grow from that as well. And you know, even though we have these challenging days when you want to pull out your hair and at the end of the day you're saying, that's it, I quit, I've had enough. It's just a short period in time. You have tomorrow. Tomorrow you're going to restart, reinvent the day and move forward again, right? So it's just, I guess, daily moving forward is
Mm.
what is something that I do. Like,
Yeah.
I can have some really amazing days and I can really have some really crappy days. But reflecting on that, what do you learn from the bad experiences? What do you learn from those positive experiences? And you utilize that to, build your own toolbox and then, strengthen yourself. You get stronger on a daily basis and then just move forward from there. So,
Mm. I love that. I think that is a beautiful and powerful message, that ultimately, yes, society might look at us one way, and there's definitely aspects that we recognize need to be changed. But, you know, while we're, pushing for that good change, to be saying, okay, you know what? Let's look at what we got going on right now. Let's look inside and let's do that work exactly like you said. I think we have a lot of power in the sense of, I love what you said first and foremost about, connecting with nature and getting a lot of strength in nature, spending that time on the land. And, I think that's a big theme for me right now. I feel like I'm mentioning it on every single podcast, to do grounding exercises in the sense of like removing your socks and your shoes and getting your feet into the dirt to actually get that amazing energy from the earth. But recognizing that, especially for Indigenous people, we recognize the spirit in everything, that there's power around us all of the time and we can be drawing from it. And not in the sense when we talk about empowering ourselves that we need to be the most powerful and overpower people. We don't need to take from one extreme and go to the next, where I'm feeling disempowered and now I need to manipulate all the power so that I'm the most powerful. Like that's crazy. And that's of course a very Western construct, I think. Maybe it's a human one. I don't know. I mean, I guess it exists in every culture. But nevertheless, to walk in your own power and to find those healing practices, I think what you said was like bang on, that we need to be doing that work on ourselves, focusing on ourselves. And we have the power to choose who gets to surround us, right? We have the power to determine who gets to be our friendship, whether toxic family members, we allow them access to us. Maybe in their unhealed state, it's not a good time for this relationship. Maybe we recognize that our families need to do the work and they need to, and we need to be clear with them that, you cannot come around me with your BS, you need to do the work on yourself. And when you're in a better place, then maybe we can renegotiate the terms of this relationship. But for the time being, and for my own mental health and sanity, maybe we don't have a relationship for now, and maybe I lean more on my friends who are very loving and supportive and help to build me up. And even our relationship with the person, our partner, whoever we choose as a partner, that we have a lot of power in who we're choosing to surround us with. And so recognizing when a relationship is good for us and helps us to become the best version of ourselves, or when we're with someone who really inspires, our negative self, because we all have one. We all have
yeah.
a dramatic self. We all have, you know, unhealed bullshit inside that, somebody triggers. And I actually heard this one today, that all relationships trigger us in some way, shape, or form. And I kind of stopped and I thought, that's a little bit interesting. I do think that some of my friendships, it's a little bit easier, to be around these people. But when I think of my, romantic relationships, definitely, there are triggers that happen. And then of course, now we're going to go to how do we work through those triggers? Do we do it in a healthy way with difficult conversations, with boundaries, with respect and, acceptance? Or do we do it, where it's a full-on brawl in the street and drunken and creating a lot of drama, so we have to really be selective of the people that we're with and recognize that, what, yeah, they might need to do work, but what about us? Right? I love how you mentioned, that you had to do a lot of self-reflecting even after your relationship ended, and recognizing, okay, what are the things that I need to do to get myself, to be in a healthier state. And I think that's where we can be practicing our power, right? That we can, what are the things we can do to become the best version of ourselves possible in a relationship, but also by ourselves if we're alone, because we're still going to be influencing others, when we're out and about in the world, in the workforce. And so we want that to be as good of experience as possible. So what are the things that we can do to make us, easier to be around? Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, my friend. Well, I don't know if you have any, parting thoughts. I know you definitely have probably a lot that you got to get to today. So I'm really grateful that you, sat down with us and we were able to really talk about this. That was real important to me that we talk about dismantling the patriarchy, but also, I really think that this episode moved more towards how do we empower ourselves. And I really love that. I think that's a really beautiful sentiment to end on, that it doesn't, you can look at a pile of shit and it can be really super negative, but how do we, transform that, and then turn it into something positive? I think that's a really powerful tool just to do that alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just to reiterate, um, if we want change, we can't change the whole world or we can't change society, but we can definitely change our thoughts and our point of views and our perspective on how we choose to live our life on a daily basis. Do you want to live in, you know, a negative perspective on a daily basis? I mean, that shit will get you sick, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, having all those that negative energy within yourself, that anger, the frustration, if you continue living with that on a daily basis, it will definitely get you sick.
Mm,
So I choose the latter, where,
mm,
I mean, let that crap and shit fall to the wayside. I mean, we cannot change it, no
mm,
matter what we try to do, but we can change our perspective on how we, myself, yourself, can live our life, how we want to live our lives on a daily basis, even though we're dealing with all the issues, male patriarchy and everything like that, when's uh, all their promises and everything from chief and council, like any, I guess regular drama from an indigenous nation, right?
mm,
And the how are we going to move forward when you see that, but you're present in that pile of crap on a daily basis. So, choosing your battles basically, but also having that mindset and perspective that um I have to take care of me. I'm the only one that can change me. I am, special and I am worthy,
mm,
and I know I can make things better for myself if I focus on myself, because usually when you do that, when you focus on yourself, it resonates and it can, I guess, your energy shifts to other people as well, because they can feel it, they can sense it, how you plan to live your life on a daily basis. We can't, change the mentalities of men or women, but we can definitely do something to change ours. And moving forward, that's makes us even more powerful every day because we're focusing on ourselves. We do have, you know, ourselves and our children, our grandchildren that we have to think of, right?
Mhm.
And there's that saying on a daily basis, you have to focus on yourself. You have to take care of yourself because if you don't, you're not going to be able to take care of anybody else, right?
Right?
So, and a lot of people think it's selfish to take care of yourself, but it's not, right?
Mm-mm.
So, taking that into consideration, I implement that daily into my life. I
Mm.
don't care about, well, I guess I do in regards to the bullshit that happens in Indigenous communities, but, choose your battles
Yeah.
and move forward.
Oh, I love that, my friend. And I love that you ended on, how self-care is not selfish. I think
Yeah.
that's definitely a huge theme for philanthropy, that people learn and recognize that. I think the difference between self-care and selfishness is when you focus on yourself for the advancement of yourself, at the expense of everybody else, that's selfish. But if you're focusing on yourself, taking care of yourself, because maybe people may or may not be able to do that for you, but you take care of yourself so that you can take care of everyone else around you, then that's a huge marked difference between selfishness and self-care. And so I love that you mentioned that, because that's really important, that you're able to recognize that we need time, downtime, because the work is exhausting, like you said. And we need to be able to recognize when we need to, take a step back and just, take care of ourselves, because we want to move forward and continue with the work, even if it's challenging. But we want to do so with love and grace and kindness and compassion, and put that good energy in the world. So we have to make sure that we're filling our own cups in order to do that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Ah,
And just in conclusion, I want to thank you for inviting me. It's amazing to see your beautiful face again and to just have a conversation with you.
aw.
So we definitely have to, meet sometime in the near future. Maybe I'll go to Saskatoon and visit you for an evening or something, and we'll just get together again.
Oh, I would love that, my friend. I know I was briefly in Edmonton the other day, and it was so jam-packed. I didn't get to see your beautiful face and give you a hug. So very soon, my friend, I hope we can get together. But thank you so much for, coming on this podcast and sharing your brilliant mind, and, helping to uplift hopefully all the women who are listening, and then also the men too, who maybe need to, take a step back and say, hey, wait a minute. What am I doing to uplift the women around me? And even what am I doing to uplift the men around me? Because that is also
Exactly.
something that we got to work towards, making sure that all of our Indigenous people are feeling more empowered, but healthy power, right? That it's not, these corrupt practices, that people are learning how to self-care, take care of themselves so that they can take care of everybody else too. That's really important. So, my friend, thank you so much. We will meet again very soon. And of course, maybe at some point we'll do another podcast. We'll talk about something else. I know our talks
Oh,
are
that'd be
really
great.
powerful and amazing. So, I would love that. But I hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you so much, my friend. Muistas.
Moistas, love ya. Take
Love
care.
you too. Bye.